Let's move on to Houston, another interesting team with, big quarterback decision at the top for them. What did you make of Houston's offseason?
Yeah, so I am a little bit confused. They're approaching free agency where it made sense in the beginning of the Nick Caserio era to kind of go with a lot of one-year deals. You knew it was a multi-year rebuild. There was no reason to spend a ton of money or sign guys to multi-year contracts because, realistically, it all led to today, to taking a quarterback very early and then trying to figure things out. But I don't get why it kind of continued. You bring in Sheldon Rankins, good player, but a one-year deal again. You bring in Dalton Schultz, good player, one-year deal again. I just don't get why you, at some point, you look to maybe add some foundational pieces. Again, don't overspend in free agency. I'm not saying you're going to fix this roster in free agency, but nevertheless, found that kind of weird. And then the draft, I mean, look, we'll talk about it forever, but I think the trade was one of the worst trades we've ever seen. Giving a first and third round pick to Arizona next year when you have a rookie quarterback with a very bad receiving core, with a very bad defense. I love the coaching staff, but you're probably giving a top 10 pick in a very good draft class and a top 75 pick in a very good draft class to Arizona. So, you know what? Look, CJ Stroud and Will Anderson's a heck of a haul. Could be awesome players. I like Tank Dell. I don't know. The direction that they're trying to go, I just don't frankly understand.
Yeah, I'm kind of with you. I remain a little bit confused as to what their free agent approach is. It made sense the last couple of years where it felt to me like they were just treading water until they actually got this Deshaun Watson capital in the building, and then they could deploy that in future years. This was the year to deploy it, and they did in the draft. But free agency felt like the same thing, where we just turn over like the bottom 25 spots of the roster simply because we have to, because there's got to have something happening. It felt like this was a team who now's the year where you start going after these bigger impact players. And okay, they got a couple of players in this list, which you would expect how long the list is, that will be useful players, like trading for Shaq Mason. I like as a move. I think that's a really good one. Might even be my favorite move of their offseason. Jimmy Ward, Robert Woods, these are guys that can contribute and can be useful players to them, but it didn't feel like the, real kind of seismic shift in propelling this team forward. But okay, let's talk to me about this trade for Will Anderson Jr. How you said it was one of the worst trades you've ever seen. How bad is it when you stack it up next to, because when you say worst trade ever, right, you start thinking Herschel Walker, you start thinking Ricky Williams trade where, Mike Ditka just went, here, take everything. How bad is it on that scale as opposed to just, bad trades in the last few years when everybody's had a vague idea of how to work this stuff?
So it's not on a historic scale. I think you do see that the markets are different in the rookie wage scale era versus in the past for a bunch of reasons. Teams used to throw around first round picks like crazy because their contracts were big. So you didn't actually get surplus value on the draft picks. You were basically paying a lot of unknown commodities a good chunk of money right away. If anything, it kind of made sense for, obviously Washington was famous for just never making a first round pick for like a decade straight. But here's the thing for me is that, and look, I like Will Anderson, but you cannot find a draft analyst anywhere that thinks he is a, Myles Garrett, Nick Bosa level prospect. That person is not out there. And so I wouldn't even like it if you did trade a future first and a third to go get a Myles Garrett level prospect. I think the odds that player lives up to that, compensation is very, 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 very low. But they didn't even do that. They went up to get a very good, I think, extremely high floor 8-sack type of guy that probably does help you build a foundation and is, I mean, look, I tweeted out at the combine, this is dumb, but his podium was the most impressive podium I've ever been to. Seems like a super smart dude, an awesome guy, everything you want to kind of turn around a culture. I think Will Anderson, from what I saw, 10 minutes, is that guy. But it's just you're giving up incredibly premium draft capital to another team, and you still might stink next year. You probably will stink next year. Yeah, you mentioned, look, I like Shaq Mason trade. The offensive line is quietly a very good offensive line at most of their spots, but there's just still so many glaring needs on this team. The defense, D'Amico Ryans comes from San Francisco. I think the sixth best defensive lineman on San Fran, probably the number one defensive lineman on this Houston Texans roster. All due respect to Jerry Hughes and Sheldon Rankins and whatnot. I love their secondary. Their secondary has good talent and is super duper deep, but there's just so many other holes that to invest 3 really, really solid picks in one player is just not a good use of resources.
Yeah, it's almost impossible to frame that trade as anything other than bad process. Now, bad process can yield good results sometimes. Like sometimes you put a bet down on a real long shot and the long shot pays off, but it's a long shot for a reason. I mean, that's what this trade is. It is a massive gamble on a long shot that Will Anderson ends up being exactly as good as you think he is. And you can even try and argue that it was worth the picks that you gave up to make it happen. So it's just bad process that may or may not end up proving them correct, I guess, if you like. But ultimately, this offseason is going to come down to whether C.J. Stroud is the right guy or not, and that has its own question marks. In terms of my favorite moves, I mentioned the Shaq Mason one. I love Tank Dell as well. I think in the third round, that's an absolute steal for Tank Dell. Much as we were talking about Bryce Young, if he was 6'2", 220, would be in a Trevor Lawrence kind of conversation. If Tank Dell was like 190 pounds, we'd be talking about him as a clear first-round wide receiver, and it wouldn't be – he might be the best receiver in this draft, but at 165, you're like, all right, that's scary. But he has the potential to be so good. I love that pick.
Yeah, no, he's a stud. I don't know if I mentioned this on this show, but someone at Houston said he's the hardest working player he's ever been around. Like, could not say enough good things about him. So, it's cool, the story that CJ Stroud asked him to go get him. He's obviously, I think he DM'd the Houston Texans main account saying, don't let me leave the city, which is just awesome. Like, I love everything Tank Dell, so I'm with you on that one.
Nice. So B overall for Houston, B- for free agency, B- for the draft. Shakes out to a B overall for our grading.